screen this. All right, it should be there.
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So, yeah, I mean, just a quick disclaimer: don't use this for real life, please. And also, I'm not like an expert. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm by no means like a real pilot or anything of the like. And this is also primarily airliner focused. So, also, I guess you should sort of know before you try this. You should have an idea of how to fly the plane that you want to fly, and like how to change the FMC and put in waypoints and stuff like that. But other than that, this will just be a quick like ATC / how to fly from point A to point B on VATSIM kind of thing. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a flight plan. And actually, I'm going to change this up here and share my screen instead of the app so that I can do stuff like that. All right. So one thing I really like to use is, I mean, you can use any number of tools, but I really like to use SimBrief. And basically with SimBrief is you make an account, you click new flight, and then you type in your departure airport and your arrival airport, and you click the aircraft that you want to fly. And there's like a big long list of anything you might have. I like to fly the 737-800 or whatever, and you click that, and then you have a number of options down here, like your departure runway, your arrival runway. It's automatically selected for you, but you can change them if you want. And then it will come up with a route for you. And this is the routing that, you know, you might fly on a trip like this, I suppose. And I mean, you can change it. You can make your own. You can go to the suggested routes here. Excuse me. But anyways, I just usually just leave this here and click the default one.
A website that shows the waypoints and where they're located?
Yep. I mean, this will show you in here as well. But you can also click any of these here. Personally, I prefer SkyVector of all of them. And there's the route, and here's the high altitude charts. Did not mean to do that. There we go. And basically, yeah, you take off here. You're on your CAPTA 2 departure, which gets you up to this point, the CAPTA, and then you go and shows you all of the waypoints along your route and your arrival as well. Make sense?
Yeah, does SkyVector have the names of the waypoints listed?
Yeah, you just have to zoom in.
Way zoom in, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. There's, yeah, I think also if you hover over these, it'll highlight it here. There's Hank as well right here. Yep. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
I think FlightAware might have it too. You can click a number of these. Maybe not FlightAware, but yeah, there's like a bunch of different services here. But yeah. So this is what I use. And then what I'll generally do is I will click Generate OFP. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up something that looks like... all right, we'll click generate, and then you click yes, and then it's going to do this. It's going to take a few seconds, and what that's going to create is a flight plan, and flight plans look somewhat like this. It's just like this, you know, blank and scary looking text, which as a flight simmer you only ever use the first 3 pages of, but there's like a ton of pages with a ton of stuff that we don't really need. Anyways, a lot of this stuff is what you're using to start up and do all the procedures for your plane once you get flying, so don't get overwhelmed. The only thing you really need to be concerned with VATSIM wise is your route, and your route is here. So the first here in any of these like waypoints followed by a number, that's your it's usually going to be the first thing along your route. That's your SID, so your standard instrument departure. This waypoint right after that will be your transition out of it. And then you have a route. So you go direct to Avon, direct to Hank. Then you're using an airway called the Quebec 935 airway into Ponct. And Ponct is your transition into the JFUN 2 arrival, which is a standard arrival for Boston, runway 22 left. So that's one thing you need to be concerned with. You also want to know what your cruise altitude is. And so you'll look here for that. You also want to know your estimated time on route. So that's an hour and 4 minutes. And you also want to know how much fuel you have, which is your total is 3.5 kilograms or 3.5 tons of fuel. And you also know that you need about half of that in order to arrive. And if 1.72 tons gets you to an hour of flight, then twice that, you have about 2 hours of fuel, for example. And you're going to need all that in order to be able to file your flight plan, which kind of brings us to our next point over here. So these are a bunch of other tools that you can use for flight planning. VATSIM is just something that I'll open up here. It just lets you see what ATC is online, because it might help you figure out where you want to fly, because you obviously want to fly where you have ATC coverage. Like I wouldn't want to fly over here in Kansas City to Memphis, for example. Like I wouldn't want to do that flight because it would just be as if I was flying offline, not on VATSIM at all. Whereas I can see here that Dulles and Washington National are all like staffed, and you've got DC Center. So, you know, a flight from here to Toronto might make a lot more sense for the current case. So anyways, this is just another tool. Everything's linked here, and I'll post the link to that earlier. So yeah, this is VATSIM. You also want to, so this is what an event looks like on VATSIM. You can see there's just a line of flights from, I think from Taipei here to the Tokyo airport there. So it's kind of cool. And I mean, I always at least look for these big blocks, which is the center controllers, because center controllers can handle everything from your clearance to your arrival. But you know, ideally you'd want to have also like ground and delivery controllers and stuff. So anyways, that's just pre-flight planning stuff. So before you file your flight plan, you'll want to connect to the network. So load into your starting airport in whatever sim you're using, and make sure that you're at a gate or stand. And you never want to load into a runway and connect to the network, because that's, you know, disrupts a lot of things. So yeah, you connect using whatever pilot client you want to use, and then you're going to click file a flight plan. I'm not really sure how to do it in X Squawk Box, but in XPilot and VPilot, this is how you do it, and I'm pretty sure it's very intuitive. So what you're going to do is pretty intuitive. Like you basically just enter it in what it asks for. So your departure airport, your destination, your alternate. Your alternate can be found in your flight plan, which is over here. So where is it? Okay, so you're departing YYZ Toronto, arriving in Boston, and your alternate is PVD, which I don't remember which airport that is. But that's essentially what you're going to type in. Actually, if we look at the map, PVD is Providence, looks like. So yeah, it shows you your alternate routing. That's just in case you need to divert. So anyways, you're going to type all of these things in, and you're going to put your expected departure time. It doesn't need to be exact. If you're a little bit late or if you're a little bit early, it's no big deal. Your time en route, the amount of fuel that you have on board according to your flight plan, your cruise speed, which is in ground speed. It's usually about 400 to 480, depending on winds and stuff. Your cruise altitude, which is also in your flight plan. And then you're going to want to copy and paste your route from your flight plan into here. And that's the route that you're filing and expecting to take. In your remarks, you can put whatever you want. You can say, hey, I'm new to VATSIM. Please have mercy on me. You can tell them how to pronounce your call sign. If your call sign isn't something super common like Air Canada or Delta or something like that. And then you're going to want to click a voice option. So you don't actually need a microphone to fly on VATSIM, because you can receive instructions via this console here. So if you can hear voice, but you can't speak because you don't have a microphone, then you click receive only. If you can both have a microphone and headphones, you can click send and receive. Or if you want to do text only, then you can do it from here. Or you can click this option. And then all you need to do is hit file, flight plan, and that'll go in the system. And they'll see it like right away. The other thing that's easy to do is if I actually go back into SkyVector here, not SkyVector, into SimBrief. Once you generate your OFP, if you scroll down, you have a bunch of different, what are they called? File types that you can download here. And these are all used in different, these are all in different formats. So for example, you can download like a PDF, and you can just click the PDF download here, and that's for the Airbus electronic flight bag, or you can download them for specific sims. So for FS 2020, you can download this .pln file, and what you can do is you can load that into your FMC directly from the simulator itself, or you can, in our case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna download the VFP here, which is for vPilot, but also works with XPilot, or Squawk Box if you're using Squawk Box. So you can download that, and then if you go back into here, into your flight plan, you can actually load from a file. And if you load that file into here, it'll automatically fill all of this stuff for you, and you don't need to do anything, which is cool. So I really like that. But yeah, that's how you file a flight plan. And the earlier you file it, the better, because if you give them enough time, they will actually give you a pre-departure clearance, which means you don't need to contact them for clearance. They're just going to message you privately, like what your clearance is, which is always nicer to have. So step 3 is after you file your flight plan and you're connected to the network and you're on the ground and you've started up your plane and everything, you want to get the ATIS. Do you know what the ATIS is?
I am not sure, no.
Okay, so ATIS just stands for Airport Terminal Information System or Service. One of those two, I don't remember. It's basically just like a frequency which has a repeating loop of information. So it's like a pre-recorded message. And usually it will have information about the weather, and it will also have other information. So let me see if I can pull up an ATIS here on VATSPI. Can you see VATSPI right now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so cool. So if we tune in into here, you can actually see the ATIS from here using VATSPI, which I really like. So I can get the ATIS details, and it'll show here. It's in a really bad format the way it is here, but excuse me, I gotta sneeze. But you can see immediately. Do you know how to read an ATIS or a weather report?
Not even slightly.
Okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. So one thing you're going to note here is information Sierra. So you want to note down the letter, because they basically use letters as like the revision of the ATIS. The ATIS gets updated like every 30 minutes or so because the weather keeps changing, right? So first you're going to have weather information, which maybe I'll do another tutorial on how to read, but like this is basically your wind. So this is telling you that the wind, the direction is 200. So it's coming from the southwest. It's 12 knots. It's a 12-knot wind, and it can sometimes gust to 17 knots. This is your visibility. So you have 10-mile visibility, which is really good. This is just denotes that it is raining. This is scattered clouds at 1,300 feet, broken clouds at 1,900 feet, and overcast clouds at 5,500 feet. This is the temperature. It's 27 degrees. The dew point is 24, and the altimeter is 2959. So that's one of the most important ones that you care about. So what this tells us is it's raining and it's stormy. It's pretty stormy in DC. That's all we know. The other way, the rest of the information that the ATIS shows is what's going on in the airport. What are they doing? Which runway can you expect? Which approach can you expect if you're flying into that airport? So it's telling you arrivals, you're expecting the River Visual 19. Where is it? they are landing and departing from runways 19, 15, and 22. So if you're at DC and you're getting ready to depart, you know that you're going to be out of one of these runways, and it's going to be up to the delivery controller to tell you which one of those you're actually going to be using. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. Then it's going to have other information. So NOTAMs means notice to airmen, notice to all airmen or something like that. And it's just like hazards and stuff that they need to know. For example, sometimes a runway might be closed, or there's cranes in the vicinity, there's birds in the vicinity. You can do an RNAV approach on request. And then it says it wants you to read back all runway assignments and read back all hold short instructions. So that's pretty standard. You would do that anyways. But I guess it's not FAA required, or maybe sometimes people get lazy and they don't. And so they're just making sure to tell you in there that they specifically want you to read back all of those instructions. And I'll tell you what those instructions mean. But yeah, you just want to note down that kind of stuff. Operate mode C or mode Charlie on all taxiways. That means usually you don't squawk mode Charlie until you take off. But here they want you to squawk mode Charlie on all taxiways, like while you're taxiing and stuff. I guess this is DC. So they have an extra little bit here that says, be cautious of the prohibited airspace over the White House. And then it will say advise on initial contact that you have information Sierra. And that's why I said you want to note down what that letter is, because when you ask for clearance, or when you ask for taxi, or when you're talking to a controller at the airport and you're making first contact with them, they want to know that you've actually listened to the ATIS and you've gotten the information. And so that's how they verify that, is because you tell them that you have information Sierra, and that's how they also verify that you have the most current information, in case information Tango is now current and you haven't gotten the new ATIS since. So that's why I said make note of that letter. All good?
Yep.
Cool. So back to here. Yeah, so you can either listen to it. You can tune your frequency, your radio to that frequency, and you can listen to it and write everything down, or you can cheat like I just did and get it via text, which is usually what I do, just because to save time. Yeah, so you want to know your information, your departure runway, your altimeter, and your weather in general, your departure frequency, which it will sometimes say, other times they'll tell you in your clearance, and any other pertinent information, like I said. So next thing you're gonna want to do is you're gonna want to get your charts, and so you're gonna want your charts for the entire trip. So generally there's 4 or 5 different charts that you're gonna need. You're gonna need the airport chart for the airport that you're departing out of. You're gonna need your departure chart. Then you're gonna need your arrival chart, then your approach chart, and the airport chart of the airport that you're arriving into. Do you have any experience like reading charts like that?
Slightly. That is like my area of focus at this point.
Okay, cool. So do you know where to get charts?
Yeah, I'm familiar with SkyVector for sure. The other ones that you list here, I'm saving everything as a bookmark that you're putting on the screen right now.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna make this presentation available afterwards as well.
Great.
But yeah, I use Navigraph personally because it's super convenient. I don't mind paying for it. It's a really nice service because they also give you like the updated navigation data for your sim. So I really like them. But yeah, so just as long as you have a way to get these charts, then that's good. So here's what an airport chart looks like. Maybe I should have used the simpler airport, but this is Toronto Airport. This is the airport I fly out most often, both in sim and in real life. So the first thing you want to do is figure out where you are. Usually when you load in, you'll kind of have an idea because it shows you the map in most sims. I usually like to park over here, and then depending on the runway that they assign you, you're going to want to kind of predict your taxi path, right? So if I'm parking here and I know I have to depart out of runway 23, then what I'm expecting is taxi via Alpha Lima, then right on either Alpha or Bravo, usually Alpha, go all the way down here and turn right on Hotel, and then hold short here. and then that'll be my departing. And then you just try and predict it so that when they tell you, you don't have to spend like a minute figuring out if it makes sense or not, and you can be ready to go. It can get hard to find taxi paths sometimes, so that just kind of comes with practice. The other thing is it doesn't really matter for this airport because every runway is pretty big, but sometimes they may hold you. So sometimes they might give you the departure here for runway 23 at Bravo, which is this taxiway here. And if you depart from here, you have like, I don't know, maybe 70% of the runway that you would normally have. And so if you're in a Dreamliner, right, you might want to request the full runway, or even like if you're here at hotel, you might want a little bit extra runway just in case, right, just to be sure. And in that case, you can say, if they give you a taxi instruction via hotel, you can say, could we have the full runway, please? And then they might say, okay, taxi via hotel, then Quebec, and then hold short runway 23 instead. With me so far?
Yep, this is pretty clear, this part.
Cool. All right, ATC order of contact. That's one thing. So now we're about to contact ATC for the first time. So basically, for a full flight, it looks like this. You're going to talk to your delivery controller. Then you're going to talk to either a ramp controller or a ground controller. Ramp controller doesn't really exist in VATSIM. It's usually just a ground controller, but I just wanted to put that there just in case. So yeah, you're going to want to talk to the ramp. They'll give you the push and start clearance, and they'll guide you towards the taxiways. Then ground will give you the taxi path to the runway, and at some point they will say contact tower now, and tower will give you the takeoff clearance. Then tower will hand you off to departure once you're a minute or so into the air. Departure will handle your climb to your like cruise altitude and stuff, and then you'll contact center, and as you navigate to your descent, you'll probably go through 1 or 2 or 3, even 3, or however many different centers there are, depending on how many airspaces you pass through. Center will then hand you off to approach for your descent. Approach will hand you off for tower to tower for your final approach, like towards the runway. And then once you're on the ground, they will hand you over to ground, and ground will guide you to parking. So it's pretty standard. You go up and then you go down. All right, getting clearance. Honestly, like the first, I don't know, I think departing can sometimes be trickier than arriving in terms of contacting ATC, because you get a lot of information at once. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you filed your flight plan now like 15 minutes ago. So you're going to want to check to see if you received a pre-departure clearance. And what that is basically just them giving you your clearance, but in text form, and private messaging it to you instead of reading it over the radio, which is more convenient and easier because you don't need to worry about mishearing or anything like that. Excuse me. Oh, my allergies today suck. If you haven't gotten one, then what you're going to want to do is switch to the delivery frequency, which is, listed in your either on VATSPI or in your pilot client. And you're going to want to say, Toronto delivery, this is Maple 7654. We have information Sierra. We'd like to pick up IFR clearance to Boston. Something like that. Pretty simple. If they're super busy, one thing I should note, if they're super busy, and you can like barely get in, you're not going to want to contact them and give them all of this information at once. You're just going to want to say turn on ground Maple 7654, and then they'll say Maple 7654 go ahead, or you're going to say or they're going to say Maple 7654 stand by, we'll get to you in a second, which is just what that means. They might also, you could also say, if you wanted to state that you're intending to ask for clearance, you could say, but not give them the full information. You could just say Toronto ground Maple 7654 with request, which just lets them know that you want to ask them something, not necessarily for clearance. And then they'll tell you whether they're ready for you or not. But if it's like super quiet, or if they're only handling 1 or 2 people, then you can just go ahead and ask for clearance right away. Yeah, so this is where reading the ATIS becomes kind of important, because some airports will ask for you to include specific information in your clearance request, such as where you are in the airport. You know, usually they'll know because they have like the screen up, but yeah, they'll want to know where you are. Sometimes they'll want to know your aircraft type, even though you've submitted that in your flight plan, or when you connect it to the networks, stuff like that. So just make sure you read the ATIS and see if there's anything specific you need to include in there. All right, so they're gonna give you the clearance, and the clearance will go something like this. They'll say, Maple 7654 clear to Boston via the KEPTA 2 departure BIMPA transition, then continuous filed. Or they'll just say clear to Boston is filed. Or they'll give you a completely different route than you planned for. They'll say, Maple 7654, I have a route amendment for you, advised ready to copy, which just, gives you time to get something up to write the new route, write it down, because they're going to be reading stuff off to you that you're going to want to listen to closely. And then you're going to say ready to copy, and then they'll give you the new route to follow and to put into your computer and your autopilot and stuff. They'll also give you a departure runway. So if your ATIS, as I showed you earlier, sometimes it'll have more than one departing runway, like the one that I showed you. Other times we'll just have one. They're only departing. They're usually for smaller airports. They're only departing out of one runway. So they're not going to give you departure runway, but in that case they would. And if they don't, it means they either forgot or somebody else will give it to you. You can always ask them, hey, what runway can I expect for departure? They'll give you the departure frequency, which is, if I go back to the order of things, it's number 5 here, which is who you contact once you're airborne. And then they'll give you a squawk code. And if you're getting a PDC, usually they will call squawk code, they will call it beacon. And then they will either give you push and start instructions, or they will not, in which case you need to call afterwards and say ready for push and start. So here's what it looks like. They might say Maple 7654 clear to Boston by the KEPTA 2 departure BIMPA transition, then continuous file, departure runway 24 right, departure frequency 125.77 squawk 5406. And then you would read back every little bit of information that they've given you. You'd say clear to Boston, KEPTA 2 departure BIMPA transition, then it's filed, departing runway 24 right, departure frequency 125.77 squawk 5406, Maple 7654. And then they would confirm that what you've read back is correct. So they'd say 7654, read back correct, push and start at your discretion, call ground 121.9, run ready for taxi. And then you would say push and start approved, over to ground for taxi, have a good day, thanks, 7654. So that's like a very basic call and response kind of thing. A lot of ATC is they tell you something and you confirm what they tell you. It's the basic formula. Make sense?
Yeah, you responding, you're saying that that's just really standard and you would just know what to say? Because that's a lot of information to repeat back.
Yep. So it all comes down to practice. I would very, very highly recommend having a notebook in front of you.
No lie.
Especially for your clearance. I mean, when you're in the air and it's like super quick stuff, like turn right heading 310, climb and maintain flight level 290, it's pretty easy. You can just say, it's easy to keep that in your short-term memory before you read it back. But for stuff like this, then it can be kind of tricky. So it's very good to, invent your own shorthand and also write it down for sure. And I mean, it's no big deal if you have to ask them to say again. Like if you didn't get all of it, you can just say again a little bit slower for Maple 7654. Like it's no big deal, especially if you put that you're kind of new to VATSIM in your remarks. They won't be mad.
Yeah, I got it.
All right. Any questions about that?
Nope.
It's simple to ask for clearance. It's just hard to understand everything. All right. So after they've given you clearance, you know what departure you're on. You know what SID you're using. You know what route you're doing. You can now do a departure briefing. So you want to get out your departure chart. So it looks something like this. Have you seen this one before?
Yeah, I have seen it. haven't necessarily used it a ton.
Okay, so yeah, so you don't want to deviate from your SID at all unless given explicit instructions to. If you are given a SID for departure, you are expected to stay on it. So basically, you're going to want to look at the runway that you're departing from, right? So that's runway 23 in this case, which is this runway like this. The runway heading is 237. And then you're going to want to come here, down here, or, it'll be somewhere in a corner on these charts. And you're going to want to look at your runway that you're departing from, and you're going to want to read your climb instructions. So this says, unless otherwise assigned, climb heading 237 to 1,100, which basically just means, stay along the runway, like stay above the runway until you reach 1,000 feet. Or 1,100 feet, I guess, in this case. And then turn right to heading 245. So right here, you can actually see it. It's your on runway heading. You reach 1,100, and then you make a slight right turn to heading 245. And for this specific SID, it wants you to stay on that heading. Do not deviate from that heading. And usually you'd use your autopilot for this until departure tells you to, right? Because what this says is right turn heading 245 or as assigned and expect radar vectors to savoir. Do you know what radar vectors are?
No.
Radar vectors just means ATC is telling you where to fly instead of you following your GPS.
Got it.
So you might hear something like vectors to final. That means stop using your autopilot, or at least stop using your route in your autopilot, like your navigation mode, and fly the heading and altitude that I tell you to fly. Make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing here. You're basically on this 245 heading. So once you're up here, tower will probably say something like Maple 7654 contact departure now 124.5, and then you'll go over to departure 124.5. Have a good night. Maple 7654, and then you're going to contact departure, and you're going to say your altitude, what altitude you're going up to, and they will say they will then give you an instruction. The departure frequency will give you an instruction. They'll say they'll either give you a vector like turn left heading 120 or something like that, or they'll say direct saver proceed on course. Maple 7654 direct saver proceed on course, which just means that you can coordinate your own turn towards the first waypoint of the standard departure. So they'll either give you a heading or they'll tell you proceed on course, proceed direct saver on course. Any questions about that?
No, that's good.
Okay. And then they'll also give you an altitude to climb to. So the other thing you need to keep in mind here is the altitude. So this says, unless otherwise assigned by ATC, maintain 5,000. So you don't have any altitude restrictions here other than, reach 1,100 before you start turning to the right. But basically you can go up to any altitude. You're cleared up to 5,000 feet until they tell you otherwise. So usually when you contact departure, they'll immediately tell you proceed, direct saver on course, climb, and maintain 1,2000 or something like that. But you do not go above 5,000 until they tell you to, or above this altitude until they tell you to. And a lot of approach charts have this top altitude, so you just have to be aware of that. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And the rest is pretty easy. I mean, once you're at saver, your autopilot will take care of the rest. Or if you're flying manually, you can, vector yourself to the remaining waypoints, but you want to make sure that you're, following the path. So, I mean, this departure is valid for, two different sets of runways. There's the southwest departures and the northeast departures. So, you just have to read here. You can see that the southwest departure is you turn to the east and you go Saver, Sekit, Raikum, Kepta, Bumpa. and the northeast departures go Mobile, Rycombe, Wazi. So you just have to be wary of that. You just because it can get confusing because there's more waypoints than you have in your FMC. But yeah, you just want to make sure you're following the right route. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and this is a fun clip that you can watch on your own if you want of me messing up a not a departure but an arrival where what I did was so one thing I should mention is and like I say there, I learned that the hard way, is when you program your FMC, you might have a discontinuity. Okay, and there actually is a discontinuity in the route. It just means that two different waypoints don't connect. So this 1100 here, when you program this route, it will show up as a waypoint on your FMC. And so between 1100 and Saver, there's no direct routing. And so it will show as a discontinuity. And so what some YouTubers that teach you how to fly planes, I won't mention names, what some of them will tell you is they'll say, oh, you don't want that discontinuity. You want to just go directly to Saver. And so you're going to clear the discontinuity for your plane. And so what ends up happening is you fly like this, and then it automatically turns you to the left, and you go direct Saver before anybody clears you. And that's exactly what I did in this clip. And the Boston controller got really mad at me. So yeah, don't clear the discontinuities if you're flying online. Just fly the heading and then learn how to use your FMC and such that you can just say, okay, now I want you to go directly to Saver from where I am. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, I'd really recommend watching that clip. It's funny and I freak out. Okay, step 5. You've pushed back. You've gotten pushback clearance, and you're now, engines are started, you're ready to taxi, and you're gonna go, you're gonna want to call them and tell them that you're ready for taxi to the runway for departure. So if delivery controllers are offline, which most of the time they are because it's a boarding position, then ground is usually the one that gives you clearance, or whoever your controller is. Because remember that VATSIM has this top-down approach, right? So if one controller is not online, then you go to the next one up a level. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So if ground, or if it's the same controller that gives you taxi instructions as the one that already gave you clearance, then you don't need to restate that you have ATIS information, whatever, because they already know that you do. But if you're switching to a different frequency, then they also want to know that you've received the ATIS. And so you're going to want to say, Toronto ground, Maple 7654, ready to taxi with information, Sierra. And then they'll go, Maple 7654, hello, taxi runway 15 left via Alpha Lima, Bravo, and hold short runway 23. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go back to your chart, and you're going to want to make sure. So you're here, Alpha Lima, Bravo, and we're switching up the runway for departure just for the example. But say you're departing at a runway 15 left, then you need to get past this runway. So you should always be wary when you have to cross a runway to taxi to where you want to go. You should always make sure that you have clearance to cross it. So in this case, they said hold short runway 23, and in which case you stop here and you wait for further instruction. So that's just an example there. And you read it back. Alpha Lima Bravo, hold short 23, Maple 7654. And then, you're clear to start moving. There's so many different examples of taxi instructions that I'm not going to get into them all, but, all you need to know is the lingo. So hold short, clear to cross, holding point. Holding point is just, a point before the runway where you hold. Usually they're named after the taxiway parallel to the runway, and they have numbers. So Foxtrot 4, Foxtrot 2, Foxtrot 1, Foxtrot 3, stuff like that. But yeah, good on that?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, cool. So you're taxiing up to the runway, you're getting close to it, and at some point, ground will hand you off to tower, because tower is what handles takeoffs and landings. So you want to pay attention to the terminology that is used by the ground controller. They might say monitor tower, or they might say contact tower. If they say monitor tower, it means switch to the tower frequency and shut up. They will contact you when they're ready. If they say contact tower, then you switch and you want to, give them a call and say, hey, Toronto Tower, Maple 7654 holding, and you're going to want to say where you are. Usually you don't contact tower until you're stopped. If you're still taxiing, then, there's no need. They see you. But if you're holding short or like you're waiting for instructions, then you can contact them. That being said, if you have been waiting for like a long amount of time and it's like not obviously busy, then it's okay to make contact even if they say monitor tower, because they do forget sometimes. I've been sitting for like 5-10 minutes and I've just been like, do I contact them? They told me to monitor. Like, they probably know, but then, it's quiet on frequency. There's nobody in the airport. So, you call them and you say, hey, tower, Toronto Tower, Maple 7654, holding short runway 23, ready for departure. And they say, oh, shoot, sorry about that. Line up and wait. Runway 23. Something like that. So they'll give you two different instructions. They might give you cross runway instructions as well. You might get switched over to tower before you arrive at the holding point for your departure runway. So if you're holding shorter runway 23 here, they might say switch over to tower, and towers will be the ones that give you the clearance to cross. But yeah, it just depends on when they switch you. Where are we? Cool. And then when you're clear for takeoff, they will either say fly runway heading until further instruction, or they'll say climb by a SID, usually the latter if you're on a standard departure, which you usually are. And they might give you some other instructions depending on the airport. It's pretty rare that you'll give instructions that deviate from your standard departure, but yeah, that's it right there. Any questions about tower?
Clear enough.
Okay. Cool. Cool. So you've had a successful takeoff. Your gear is up. You're about 1,000 feet in the air. Tower's usually going to say, Maple 7654, switch to departure now. Have a good flight. And say over to departure. Thanks, Maple 7654. And then you'll switch to the frequency. Oh, another thing to note is usually when you get handed off to another controller, they will give you the departure, or they'll give you the frequency. And for some reason, I don't know exactly why, but departure, if they give you departure frequency in the ATIS or in your clearance, then it's expected that you wrote it down and you know what the frequency is. So they'll just say, switch to departure now, have a good flight. And if they have done that and you say, could I have the frequency for departure? Then, they're still going to give it to you, but it looks bad. So it's important to note that down if they give it to you. Anyways, you've got frequency, you switch over, you say Toronto departure, Maple 7654, and then you say your altitude. So, when you contact them, you might be at 2,000 feet or so. You say climbing through 2,000 feet for 5,000, which is your cleared altitude. If you haven't been cleared to an altitude yet, you go by the cleared altitude on the SID, which is that 5,000 number that we were talking about earlier. And then they'll say Maple 7654, hello, radar contact. And then they'll give you an instruction. They'll either give you the turn, they'll give you an altitude to climb, stuff like that. And then you read back that instruction. So an example might be what we were talking about earlier. Maple 7654, hello, radar contact, climb 7,000, turn left, direct saver, proceed on course. Something like that. Good with that?
Yep.
Cool. And from here on out, it's pretty easy until you get to your descent, because you're only going to be contacting ATC, I don't know, 2 or 3 more times, depending on the amount of airspace that you'll fly over. When they hand you over to center, it's pretty much the same. You say who you are and your altitude, and if you're not at cruise altitude yet, you'll say you're passing altitude with your cleared altitude. So usually departure, you're with departure for like 10 minutes or so usually. So they'll clear you up. Sometimes they might clear you up to cruise altitude. Sometimes they might clear you up to some altitude lower than cruise, and then they'll pass you over to center. And then you're going to go to center and you're going to say, climbing through 13,000 for flight level 230. And they'll say, radar contact, Maple 7654 radar contact, climb flight level 350, which is your cruise altitude. If you're flying through non-consecutive airspace, which just means, you know, you've had no ATC and you've just like suddenly popped into an area that has ATC and the controllers weren't in contact with each other, then they might give you a different transponder code. And the terminology they use for that is recycle transponder, squawk, you know, and they'll give you a new squawk code. Or they might tell you if it's really busy on their screen and they don't see you, they might say squawk ident. Are you familiar with what that means?
With what was it?
Squawk ident.
I'm familiar with what a squawk is, but ident, I don't know.
Okay, so ident just means every transponder has a little button on it. It's called ident. Basically, you just press that button, and what it does is it sends like a slightly different frequency. I mean, I don't really know how it works, but basically what it does is it makes you flash on their screen so that, you know, if they have a really busy screen of flights, then you flash and they know who you are.
Got it.
So yeah, and then it's the same for all subsequent center handoffs until you reach the top of descent. So for top of descent, you know, a controller who's like very good at their job will give you clearance to descend, you know, 20 or 30 miles before your scheduled top of descent, which will usually show in your nav display. But if you haven't received it and you're less than 10 miles or so from your top of descent, then you can contact them and ask. It's no big deal. And the way you do that is just, you know, Boston Center, Maple 7654, we're about 7 miles from our top of descent. Is it okay if we begin descending? Something like that. You know, it doesn't need to be super formal. Just let them know how far you are and that you'd want to begin your descent. And never, never, never begin descending without explicit clearance. Actually, you never want to deviate from your altitude in any way, from your cruise altitude in any way, without clearance, you know, unless emergencies and such. But those don't really exist in simming. Usually when they give you clearance, they'll say descend via the arrival. So they'll say Maple 7654, at your discretion, descend via the JFund 2 arrival. And then they might leave it at that. Or if you're looking at the arrival chart, they might give you a specific altitude to cross a certain waypoint at. So we're coming in like this because we're doing, we're landing from the north. So we're coming in, we're coming in like this. So this is the route that we're taking. We go east, 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 and they turn to the north. And then we follow this until they give us the instruction and turn us and direct us to the southbound runways. So here's all of our waypoints that we follow for our standard arrival. And they might say cross double at flight level 180. Or they might say cross lowland at and maintain 6,000. Or they might give you... Or sorry, they might say cross lowland at or maintain 5,000 because that's, you know, not within the altitude restriction. So basically, when they give you your descent, they will tell you to descend via an arrival, and they may or may not give you a certain altitude to cross a certain waypoint at, depending on, I don't know what goes on in the controller's screens, but, you know, depending on a bunch of things. But if they don't give you a specific altitude, then you need to go by the restrictions, and the restrictions are these numbers here in magenta and blue. So when you have a line underneath, it means minimum 240, so don't be below 240 here. When you have a line above like this at Brody here, then you want to be below at 6,000 or below. You don't want to be above 6,000. When you have a line above and below, it means you need to be at 7,000 by the time you reach that waypoint. And then, you know, you can deduce what the altitude restriction is for autumn here. I can imagine be between 11,000 and 12,000, but not above or below. And then you also have speed restrictions because they want to keep traffic moving. All good with restrictions and stuff?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool. If you cannot meet a restriction for whatever, you know, whatever reason, it's no big deal. Just make sure you tell them. You can say Boston Center, Maple 7654, and then we'll say Maple 7654, go ahead. And we say, we're unable to, meet the altitude restriction at autumn. We will not be able to descend below 12,000 by then. And then they'll say, no problem. And then they'll give you further instructions from there. So it's no big deal. Just make sure you tell them. All right. Anything they tell you always trumps what the charts say. So if they say, if you're at Winta and they say, cross Winta at or maintain 6,000, then, don't be like, oh, but the chart says I need to be at a minimum or a maximum of 8,000. Just, you're clear to go to 6,000 if they say you are. And then same as with the departure charts, you want to look at your landing instructions. So, we're going to plan for the 2-2 left approach, which, the approach controller will tell you, or the ATIS will tell you if you're listening to the ATIS of the airport before you arrive. And say the approach, which we're going to use as an example for this tutorial, is 2-2 left. Then, you're going to want to read what it says here. And basically what it says is, keep following the SID until you reach lowland. And then at lowland, track heading 035, which means continue on this heading, like leave lowland at 035 and don't deviate from that heading until they tell you, because they will give you radar vectors to the final approach course. And if you go back and look at that clip that I was telling you about where I messed up, this is exactly where I messed up. I had it so that I cleared the discontinuity and it connected right to the approach waypoints. And so it started turning before they gave me clearance. And the guy said, what the heck are you doing? Pretty much. So yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. So yeah, just make sure that you read the instructions and, adhere to them. Any questions about that?
No, sir.
All right, cool.
You know what? I actually do have a question. So,
sure.
If I'm flying general aviation out of, not Boston Logan, am I going to have to adhere to all of the, I guess, departure guidelines? If it was just like a small regional airplane, do they have the same type of restrictions? Height, heading, and all that?
So if you're, this is usually for, like if you're flying a Cessna, like, and you're coming into Logan, which isn't uncommon or isn't unheard of, then, and you're coming in from the west, then you're not gonna be at flight level 240 at Minsta, right? So it's like, usually if you're flying, even if you're flying IFR in a Cessna, you're not expected to be on a specific arrival. They'll just give you, IFR just basically means you're in contact with ATC. That's all it means. And you file the flight plan. The flight plan doesn't necessarily need to include an arrival or departure.
Yeah, so like if I'm flying out and on one of your last screens it was heading needs to be, I don't know, 36 or 36, and then the altitude out of the runway is 1100.
Yeah.
Is general aviation supposed to adhere to that, especially at smaller like regional?
Yeah. So take the Toronto departure chart for example. If you're flying out of runway 23 with a Cessna, then the Cessna might not even be able to climb to 1100 by here, right? Because its climb performance isn't there. And in fact, a lot of these charts, you'll see this little note here: jet aircraft only.
Yeah. Okay.
Or it is more often it'll say jet aircraft or turboprops only. So yeah, that's usually these are built for high performance aircraft, not general aviation. Yeah. Cool. So, awesome. That makes sense. We get to move on.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. The next part is the approach, which is my favorite. So I'm going to take you through the ILS approach. But I am going to mention the visual approach first. So visual approach procedures are, pretty simple because you have visual. It means you have visual reference to the airport. So what ATC will do is they will give you vectors to follow in order to line you up for the approach. So usually, and if they were to give you the visual for 22 left here, they probably bring you somewhere up here. And then they'll give you a turn to the east, and then they will say airport is at your 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, about 20 or 17 miles out or so, report field in sight. And then you'll say field is in sight, and then they will say clear for the visual approach runway 22 left, in which case you're on your own. Like, you have visual reference, so you're expected to fly your way down to the runway. So that's the visual, which is basically what you do in GA anyways. If you're doing an ILS, which is much more common, then you really, really need to pay attention to the chart. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to know how to set up an ILS approach in your aircraft. And in order to do that, you're going to need your frequency and your course. So your course here is 215, which is pretty much the heading you're following all the way down to the runway. And then you have your radio frequency for your nav radio, which is 110.3 here. And basically you're going to tune your nav radio to that, and that's going to help your autopilot guide you down to the runway. You're going to want to know your first approach altitude, which is what you enter the approach at. So Noli is back here, which is, depending on how they want to vector you in, they might enter you here, they might enter you here, or whatever. Usually they'll give you an altitude to enter at, so you don't really need to worry about meeting these if you're online. But yeah, so they might say something along the lines of, like, say you're flying, you're on that 035 heading northeast-ish. They might say, turn now heading 090, and then you'll turn east, and they'll say, turn heading 120 to intercept the localizer, maintain 3,000 feet until established on the localizer, something like that. And what that means basically is you're going eastwards, and then you're turning to 120, and that's when you're going to want to intercept the localizer, which means you're on a intercept path to cross this line here, this extended center line of the runway essentially. And when you intercept the localizer, you're basically pressing a button on your autopilot that makes the aircraft turn automatically and line up with the localizer itself. So that's what they mean by intercept the localizer.
So does the localizer only extend out to Noli?
Good question. I actually don't know. But it'll probably be a little bit past, actually. Yeah, it'll probably be a little bit past Noli.
But I probably couldn't do approach mode, at the waypoint beyond Noli. It probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, I wouldn't. But the thing is, at Noli, you can still use your GPS. You don't have to use your localizer to line yourself up, right?
Yeah.
The localizer is just for the precision approach. So that's okay. As long as you're on an intercept path with the center line, then you can arm your approach.
So if I come in like completely perpendicular to that intercept, the 215, is my plane gonna hook and start to turn, take a sharp turn?
It will. You might overshoot it, and very often you will overshoot it, but it'll continue to line itself up because it aligns itself with that frequency, right? Yeah. So as long as you have ample time to overshoot it and then come back on center line, then you're okay. But if you're doing like a really short final and you're trying to intercept a localizer at just before Vocus here, then you might want to come in at an intercept that's a little bit shallower instead of doing like a 90-degree turn. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, so then they'll say maintain 3,000 or until established on the localizer, which means do not descend below 3,000, even if it says so in the chart, until you've captured the localizer, essentially. And you'll know when that is, because not only does it say it on your primary flight display, but you know, your airplane will also start turning by itself, so you'll know. And then you're going to want to descend such that where you see the star here, you're going to want to descend such that you're at this altitude by the time you reach this waypoint here. So VOCUS, that's what you call your final approach fix, your FAP. And that's where you're essentially going to capture the glide slope, which means you're going to start descending on like a very uniform angle towards the runway. And you're, you know, if you've armed your ILS properly, then it should descend below that, whether or not your altitude is set properly on your FMC or not. But yeah, you want to make sure that you're at that altitude by the time you hit this. You know, if you're, you know, if you scoot past it a little bit and you're a little high, or if you're at like 2000 or 2500 by the time you hit here, you know, you can probably correct it. You can use your own discretion to figure out whether or not. But if you're at like 4,000 feet, when you're supposed to be at 1,700, then it might be a good idea to fly the missed approach. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. And I mean, other than that, flying an ILS is highly dependent on your own aircraft. So, yeah, I can't go into every type here. But any questions about the approach procedure?
The ILS is different from the RNAV, right?
That's right.
One of them, you have to dial in the frequency. The RNAV, and I'm just talking about Microsoft Flight Simulator. RNAV is you just put your approach in.
Yes. So the RNAV, you go based on your GPS waypoints, if that makes sense, right? So the RNAV is pre-programmed, and it essentially looks the same. So, but the RNAV basically goes, you know, when you cross Noli, you want to be at 4,000. When you cross Wayane, you want to be at 3,000. When you cross Vocus, you want to be at 1,700. Zumal at 700. Stuff like that. The ILS instead, you know, the ILS is an RNAV up until the final approach fix. From here, it doesn't use GPS anymore. What it does is it uses the radio signal emitted by the instrument landing system that your aircraft receives, and it guides itself down to the runway, which is why we call it a precision approach, because it's much more accurate than GPS. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Any other questions about that?
You know, what are the major airliners, are they coming in with ILS or are they coming in with RNAV?
It depends. The thing is, ILS isn't always available. Like, ILS is expensive to set up and maintain. So, you know, most major airports will have at least one ILS approach, but, you know, not all of them might. So given that an airport or a runway has both, ILS would always be preferred by an airline. That's right. Yeah, that's right. And a lot of airlines actually have it in their standard operating procedures that if a precision approach is available, then the pilots must use it because it's just much safer.
Got it.
Whereas other airlines might be more liberal, and they'll say, you know, use the ILS but fly it in manually to keep up your skill. So it just depends on the airline. But yeah, definitely ILS is preferred and more safe.
Good to know.
All right. Good from there?
Yes, sir.
Cool. You know, when you're established on your approach, this is the approach handoff. So center will say, okay, so we've done the approach briefing. We're not in the approach yet. This is just to get us prepared for it. Another thing that I forgot is you want to note your missed approach procedure. So it'll show it here. In this case, you continue on runway heading, and then you climb to 3,000, and then you basically hold at this waypoint here as published. But yeah, usually that's programmed in your FMC automatically. And very often you won't even get to that. You'll just say Boston Tower going around, and then they'll give you vectors from there. Anyways, when center hands you over to approach, it's going to be pretty easy. Maple 7654 contact Boston approach now. They'll give you the frequency. Have a good night. And then you read that back over to 23.45. Have a good night. Maple 7645. And then you switch over. You contact Boston approach. You tell them you're on the standard arrival. Maple 7654, we're on the J Fund 2 arrival, descending through flight level 290 for whatever cleared altitude. You don't actually need to tell them your cleared altitude, because they know that you're descending via the J Fund 2 arrival, and they know what those restrictions are, so you're just descending via that. And then they'll say radar contact, and then they'll give you, they might not give it to you immediately, but they'll give it to you at some point while you're descending. They'll give you what approach to use, which depends on, what runway they have open, what kind of approach. They might give you the visual, they might give you ILS or whatever. So an example here is radar contact, expect ILS runway 22 left approach, cross Islay Adder, maintain 6,000 Boston altimeter 29908. So yeah, that's just an example of an instruction they might give you. Do you guys know why they give you the altimeter?
I've always wondered that.
So, do you know what the difference between a flight level and an altitude is?
Nope.
Okay, so that setting your altimeter, basically what it does is it makes sure that you're reading the correct altitude, right?
Okay.
Like, do you know the relationship between altimeter and altitude?
I have no idea. It's always set to 29.98, it seems.
It's 299.2 is probably what you're thinking of. Okay, so this is kind of like ground school first lesson kind of thing, but I'll just go over it briefly. Basically, the way that airplanes know what altitude they're at is using something called a pitot tube, and the way it measures it is based on the air pressure, and it's calibrated to a standard pressure and temperature of standard pressure is 29.92 inches of mercury, and standard temperature is 15 degrees Celsius. And so basically, if you're at sea level and your temperature is 15 degrees Celsius and your local pressure is 29902, then your altimeter should read 0, is the idea. With me so far?
Yeah.
All right. So in that case, if you're in Boston and you have those exact conditions, Boston is right on the ocean, then you should be reading about 0, or, airport elevation, which is a few feet, couple tens or couple hundreds of feet above sea level. So basically, the pressure isn't always standard, right? When your pressure changes all the time, the air pressure. So if your pressure is different from standard, then your altitude will read differently than what your actual elevation above sea level is, right?
Yeah.
So the little altimeter knob on your aircraft, what it does is it basically calibrates your altimeter to the air pressure that's outside, so that if the air pressure is slightly lower, then you want your altitude to read what it actually is. So that's what you adjust it. Make sense?
So you just always want it at 0?
Well, you don't always want it at 0. You always want it to be at the correct altitude above sea level, right?
So how often do you change your altimeter?
Usually you change it whenever it changes.
Okay.
Right? So your air pressure always changes, right? Not greatly, but the difference between 29908 and 2888 is like 100 feet or so, which might not seem important, but if you're flying an ILS approach and you're supposed to see the runway 100 feet above and then you don't, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically you want to set it to the outside pressure, and then whatever system they have implemented in their aircraft, that will make it such that you're reading the correct altitude. You don't really need to know the inner workings. You just need to know that you need to set your altimeter in order to read the correct altitude. Otherwise, the altitude that you're reading will be wrong.
Yeah.
So back to the flight level altitude question. It's generally agreed upon that when you're flying above a certain altitude, that no matter what the outside air pressure is reading, everybody just agrees to change their altimeter to like a universal setting. Makes sense? So that no matter whether or not it's the right altitude, at least everybody's reading the same altitude.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, when you reach that point, and that's called the transition altitude, then you tune your altimeter to the standard setting, which in inches of mercury is 2992. With me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So above that altitude, you call everything flight level, and below that altitude, you say the actual altitude. So across North America, in the US and Canada, that altitude everywhere is 18,000 feet. So when they give you an instruction to descend below 18,000 feet, they have to give you the local altimeter so that you're reading the correct altitude. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. So that's why when you're at 290, like flight level 290, and you're descending to 6,000, which is below 18,000, so you'll be passing 18,000, they have to give you the altimeter so that you're setting the correct altitude. All right? And your transition altitude is usually noted in your approach, and no, not in your approach, in your departure and your arrival charts. So you can see it here. Transition level, flight level 180. And, you know, you never pay attention to it in the US or in Canada because it's always 18,000 feet. But in Europe, it changes everywhere. Every airport has a different one. So you always need to make sure. All right?
Yep.
Cool. Couple more slides here. Yeah, the communications with approach will heavily depend on what approach you're doing. You know, I've mentioned this already. They'll turn to intercept the localizer and they'll give you instructions for that, or they'll say clear for the visual approach, report field in sight. They might give you a speed restriction if they're trying to keep traffic flowing, or if they're trying to make sure that if you've got like a slower airplane in front of you and you're coming in doing 210 knots on final because you can, then they might slow you down so that the aircraft in front of you can land with ample time to get off the runway before you actually get down. So it's like, you know, just listen to what they're saying and repeat it back, essentially. And then at some point, they won't need to vector you in anymore, and they'll say, contact tower, and they'll give you the frequency, and then you say, thanks, over to tower, Maple 7654. So you go over to tower. You say, Boston Tower, hello, Maple 7654. On the ILS for runway 22 left, we're established on the glide slope or the localizer, whichever you are. And at that point, they'll say Maple 7654, hello. They'll give you the winds, and they'll say runway 22 left, clear the land. And you'll say clear the land 22 left, 7654. And that's basically it. Do not land until you hear the words clear to land. All right?
Got it.
All right. And that's pretty much it. That's a flight. Seems like a lot, but it comes with practice.
I'm excited for you to post the recap.
Yeah, I will. All right. Any questions?
Just general question. Do you, when you're playing in flight sim, do you always set your approach, or do you ever just take it in manually?
Well, I always set an approach. I usually will fly it until I feel comfortable taking over without the autopilot and landing it by myself. I'm not very good at that, so I like to practice it, but at the same time, I'm not very good at it, so I don't like to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So if you're cleared for a visual approach, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing an ILS approach. Right?
Yeah.
So very often I will use the ILS to line myself up, if that makes sense.
complete.
and then once I'm confident that I can take it in on my own, even though I'm on the ILS and it would be perfect with the ILS, then I turn the autopilot off and just try to bring it down on my own. But yeah.
So, on what altitude does the localizer normally come in effect? Is that between 2,000 and 4,000?
It totally depends on the airport, right? Because you just have to look at your charts. So the localizer is the localizer will come alive at this altitude here, and the glide slope will come alive at this final approach fix here.
Okay.
So in this case, 4,000 and 1,700 respectively.
Okay, the 4,000 pretty much is the beginning of the approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's when it comes in effect, and then the second number before you see. Okay, I get it now.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody told me in a tutorial they gave me, if I'm at 5,000 feet, I won't ever even hit the approach.
I mean, 5,000 feet doesn't mean anything because, you can be in Colorado where 5,000 feet is ground level. So
if I'm at Noli and I'm instead of 4,000, I'm actually 5,000, am I still going to be intercepted by the approach?
Yes. Yeah.
And will it make the corrections itself?
Not the altitude correction. Your localizer or like your approach mode that you've armed, it won't make any altitude adjustments until you hit the final approach fix.
Got it. So if I'm and you were commenting on this earlier, if I'm at 3,500 and it says 1,700, is it gonna make some drastic changes?
It will try within limitations. But if you're finding that you were not able, so let me hold on. Glide slope 737. Let me see if I can get a picture here of the PFD. Yeah, okay, cool. So you've got these diamonds here, right? This is your horizontal guidance, and this is your vertical guidance. So if you're on an ILS approach, you're looking for this diamond, and this diamond here represents the glide slope itself, and the white line represents where you are in relation to it. So here you're essentially right on the glide slope because the glide slope here is right above you. It's almost perfectly centered on where you are. So you're following the glide slope nicely. If you're coming in onto onto this approach here, and you're at like 3,500 feet at Vocus, then what that's going to show is that glide slope there is going to be like down here. And that's a pretty good indication that you're far from it enough that you should go around and try again if you get like 2 of these dots away. But if you're within, half or 3/4 of a dot, and these dots have like specific distances, I just forget what they are. But if you're within like half of this dot or 3/4 of this dot, then it's usually pretty easy to correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want to use your instruments to gauge whether or not you think you're gonna make it, and whether or not you think you can correct yourself.
Got it. Hey, and do you know about in Flight Sim, Microsoft Flight Sim, the whole approach thing, is there truly a bug where it just kind of shoots you off in a different direction? Are you familiar with that?
In the new Flight Sim?
Yes.
I don't know. I haven't done enough ILS approaches in that one.
Yeah, so I a couple of times I've noticed that I put all of the ILS in or the RNAV in, and then eventually I get to a waypoint and it just kind of shoots me off 90 degrees. And I've read that other people are doing it, that's happening to them as well.
Okay.
I think it's a bug, but I think there might be so many people that are just inexperienced, and maybe we're just doing something wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's definitely lots of autopilot bugs in the new one. So
yeah. For the most part, like I mean, I've had good luck that I've never had any issues with that. But I remember one time I was landing with Banco in Quito, and that happened to me. It completely like shot me off. This is on X-Plane, by the way. completely shot me off, and I realized later on that it was my mistake because I was over the altitude and it was trying to put me in a holding pattern, and unfortunately there was a mountain there. So that could be probably an issue where the
Yeah.
other issue could be is another airport nearby with, and it probably took that signal because that happened to me once in 2020 as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you have to always know what your autopilot is doing. That's for sure. Cool. Any other questions? No? Okay, cool. I will upload this to YouTube probably for you guys to look over if you want. But if there are no questions, then yeah. Hope that helped.
Appreciate it. Yeah, this was awesome.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Yeah, if there's anything else that you can think of, just shoot me a message. Or if you see me in a voice chat, just join up and ask me.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned RNAV while you were talking about the ILS.
Mm-hmm.
I've been looking at the airport for Erie, Kilo, Echo, Romeo, India,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually has ILS and RNAV for runway 6 or 24. And I think it'd be a good example, whether it be now or at some other point in the future, if you could show the differences in the chart between those two types of landings.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that's, they're essentially the same, right? Like you enter your final approach fix. You guys can see my screen here, right?
Yep.
So the final approach fix here is CABSA for the RNAV, and it's a 2800, and it's the same here, CABSA for the ILS at 2800. It's the same thing. The only difference is the RNAV here, you're descending via the GPS, right? So at Junog, you want to be at 1420, 1.4 miles, you want to be a specific altitude, things like that, and you're using the GPS to guide yourself down, versus in the ILS you're using a radio signal to guide yourself down. So it's the same for all intents and purposes. It's just one is generally more precise than the other.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now,
Mhm.
now that I'm seeing it after you've said that, it does make more sense.
Yeah.
I looked at it myself.
In this specific case, I don't know why they would have both. Especially because, yeah, it's like, why would you ever use the RNAV if you have the ILS, which I think is also what you were kind of getting at. I suppose it's also possible that some planes might not be able to do the RNAV, or some planes might not be able to do the ILS. So that's also the case. Like, for example, like a standard Skyhawk might not have the instruments to be able to do an RNAV because it doesn't have a GPS, but or like a VNAV capability for the GPS, but it does have a nav radio that you can tune your ILS frequency to. So that might be an example that I can think of. But yeah.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Anything else?
Let's practice some approaches.
Yeah, I'd be down to do that.